Welcome to Growing Up with AI, where I talk to parents working on AI around how they think about the technology in the context of their kids. Today, I'm joined by Demetrios Brinkmann, the founder of the MLOps Community. Demetrios shares insights into the success of his community, the evolving topics of interest, and his perspective on the current possibilities of agentic approaches. We also delve into his personal approach to technology at home, discussing whether an AI assistant constantly listening is utopian or dystopian, and the essential skills he believes his daughters will need for future success and happiness. Demetrios, welcome to Growing Up with AI.
Hello, how you doing, man?
I'm really good, thank you very much. You have two very young daughters. When they ask you, what do you do for work, Daddy? What do you tell them?
I haven't had that question yet, but I guess I tell them I just sit behind the computer and talk to people.
That sounds about as good as the explanation my wife gave the oldest son. I think he thinks my job is computer, 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 meeting, meeting, meeting.
Yeah,
So that's
sadly.
the same for you.
Yeah, exactly. That's what they see me doing for the most part.
And what would you want them to think your job is?
Superhero, right? But if that's out of the cards, I think for me, ideally, it's adding value to folks, connecting people, helping people learn and better their careers and their lives.
And the MLOps community now, I think, is about over 25,000 people worldwide, something like that. You've managed to grow it quite significantly over the last 5 years.
Yeah, the number of people in there, it's hard to say because we've got so many local meetups that are happening around the globe, and people come to maybe one meetup or they come to every meetup. So we don't really track how many folks are in the community that way. It's very hard, but the amount of people that have come through the community at least once is over 100,000.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And what sparked your interest in machine learning operations 5 years ago?
I was trying to get out of a really bad job, and so I was applying everywhere I could for a job. I got lucky because the job that I applied for that was in MLOps, the hiring manager ended up being, we just hit it off as soon as I got on the call with him and we started chatting. And then I went through all the rounds and ended up getting the job. It was in sales in the ML sphere. But from there, that company went out of business soon after I had the job. And I could see that this ML thing was very important. I could see that, ML AI was very integral
Yeah.
to certain forms and shapes of businesses. And right before the company went out of business, I started the community because I originally went at it with the idea of, maybe if I can do something in public, people would be more open to getting on a call with me.
So you started the community before you had that job, or you started the community in order to sell the product of the company you started working for?
So it was about 9 months into working for that company
Right.
that went out of business, and it was a week, 2 weeks before the company went out of business, I started the community.
And what do you think has made it so popular as it's grown so significantly over the last couple of years?
I think there wasn't a place for people to talk about the stuff that we talk about in the community. It's hard to find people who are they've been around the block, and you have experienced practitioners that are open and willing to talk with others about roadblocks or challenges that they've run into. And we also are constantly doing stuff in the community. So that helps. That keeps it active, whether it's the podcasts that get released every week, or it is the newsletter that we have, or it is the Slack that people are asking questions in, or the local meetups, or we've recently started doing conferences too.
Yeah.
So that just helps, it's a snowball that's rolling down the hill. It gains more and more momentum and it gets bigger as you have more speed.
And how have the topics that have been discussed changed over that time? When you started, there were no LLMs. Well, they were, but no one really talked about them in the same way. Now it feels like everything is just about generative AI and agentic.
It's been night and day. We had the majority of the conversations were all around, your model repos, your feature stores. It was tools that were very predictive ML specific, and you had model monitoring. That kind of stuff were the conversations that people were thinking about. How can we know if this model is making the right predictions? Which isn't so far off of what's happening now. Those conversations are still coming up, but just different flavors, right? Because now, if you can outsource the infrastructure, you should. And so you don't have to worry about all that hard work of, do I need to spin up a Kubernetes cluster? Or how do I bake this model into the Docker container? Those kind of questions have kind of gone by the wayside. That's what we were talking about back in the day. Now it's more questions along the lines of like, how can I evaluate this model's output? What are some of the best use cases that you all have seen? And the real fascinating ones now, it's all agents, right? So agents all the time, everywhere. How can we ensure that we have the proper guardrails on the agents and the proper permissions so it doesn't go and just run up my credit card bill if I give it access to pay for things?
And obviously, there's been a lot of development in this, and there's a lot of marketing dollars going into it as well. And
Mm.
sometimes quite hard to really understand what is truth versus what's just hype, especially around agentic, which doesn't even have a consistent definition. What's your view there around like, are we in the year of agentic or more like the decade of agentic?
Probably the latter, but again, it is very early in the agentic moment that we're having. And so you have certain folks that say they're using agents, but in reality, what they're doing is they're kicking off workflows that have some LLM calls inside of their workflows.
Yeah.
And it's for their thing, and maybe it goes once a day, once a hour, once every 6 hours, but that's one time because it's for their thing. Now, if you need to go and bring that same kind of capability to your company and you need to start doing things at scale, that is a whole different conversation. You can't just use some of these tools that are like, oh, create this low code, no code workflow that has some LLM calls. I think what people are really trying to do with agents that enables a lot more use cases and a lot of cool things to happen, but I have yet to see as much of it in production, is where you can give an agent a bit less structure
Yeah.
and it can still go and do this for you. And a perfect example of an agent I would have loved to have, I just got to Portugal and the flight from Frankfurt to Portugal was delayed by 3 hours, and they texted us and they sent us emails saying, "Oh, your flight's delayed." So we got to the airport thinking, "Okay, cool, we're 3 hours late." They closed the check-in on us at the normal time. And so we arrived 2 hours before the 3-hour delay,
Yeah.
thinking that, okay, check-in's gonna be at 2 hours before the flight takes off, and it wasn't. So I'm sitting there going back and forth with just a model, I think it was Gemini, and I was like, "Can I claim anything for this?" Because we went through the whole runaround. They wouldn't let us check our bag. And we had the check-in, we got the boarding pass and all that, but they wouldn't let us check our bag because they closed the bag check. So, long story short, the model said, "Yeah, you can file a claim and you should be able to get compensated for it." Where I would love to have an agent actually act
And
on
do it for
things
you.
is go file that claim for me. Like it would be great if I could just, while I'm talking to the model, press a button and then it goes and it does that.
I think there's though quite a lot of stuff coming this way right now. Integration of shopping into the agents, operator, and stuff like that.
Hmm.
Do you feel they're robust enough that you would trust them? Or kind of would you be quite worried that the claim it files with the wrong airline, or it files it and has the wrong banking information on there, or it files it in the wrong way? And would you trust it to do something like this on your behalf, given what you know of the performance of those models at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating one that we're going to get more and more acclimated to. Like I remember when Facebook first came out and I had the at university address. So I was one of the earlier ones to get Facebook, right? And everybody at my university had it. And you would hear when you go out to parties, people taking photos and being like, tag me on Facebook.
Yeah.
And there was a little bit of this weirdness of, oh man, they're taking a photo. Maybe I'm in the background, or maybe I don't want to be on there. I don't want to get tagged on Facebook or whatever. That whole preconception of I'm getting my photo taken has kind of gone out the window as we are living with phones that are basically cameras for the past 20 years, right? So, just as we got acclimated to that, I imagine we'll get acclimated to agents and the agents doing stuff, like you said, knowing that the agents are a little bit sketchy in how they actually perform these actions. That is going to be probably one of the biggest hindrance or challenges and blockers that is a large technical problem right now for the agent builders, but I don't necessarily think that it's going to forever be that
Yeah.
way. And yeah, especially when it comes to shopping. Like if it came to, hey, go file a claim for me, I don't care because I got nothing to lose there.
Yeah.
If it files it with the wrong airline, whatever, like, not the
Tried it
biggest
again.
deal.
Yeah.
If it goes and it has my credit card and then it goes on a shopping spree, it's really hard to go and tell my bank, "No, don't actually take these charges. It was an agent that went wild." That's where you have to really think about the user experience of how me as a human am going to okay everything that gets done.
Yeah. Or we live in a similar to autonomous vehicles, right? Where the
Yeah,
insurance requirement shifts to a different part of the ecosystem.
also.
I'm kind of curious. You run your community across the world. You spend a lot of time in the US, but also in Europe. Do you feel that there's a very different discourse around this space and what people are thinking about and whether they're optimistic or not so optimistic between the different continents?
I mean, even inside of the US, in San Francisco, it's all agents all the time. And outside of San Francisco, I think it's a little less common.
Yeah.
But as far as the discourse goes, I'm very biased because I go to San Francisco. The last 10 times I've been in the US, I've been in San Francisco. So I think it is a very different conversation there than what you would get if you were in my hometown of Flagstaff, Arizona, which is a
Yeah.
small city. The thing that I'm a little bit disappointed in is how easy it is to latch on to these very simplistic narratives of AI is bad, it's gonna take all our jobs, or it's gonna take over the world type thing. I don't necessarily see that happening. And even you have like confirmation bias coming out too when you see different reports saying software engineering job postings are down, or there's less software engineers now than there ever have been, stuff like that, where I'll see that kind of stuff. And irrespective of if it's true or not, I think there are very few people who will go and interrogate those numbers because the headline is what we see. And it's with everything these days, how we get this bite-sized news narratives. It's so nuanced. And
Yeah.
I really don't think that the claims of jobs being down is because of AI. I actually feel like we are, or like big companies cutting thousands of people. I don't think that it's because now AI is doing those jobs. I would just say, like, there are probably folks that are doing a lot more or have a higher standard, are able to accomplish things in a better way because they can do things with AI now. Like, I was talking to a friend who is a machine learning engineer, AI engineer, and he said now when he prototypes things or when he creates MVPs, it used to be that he would create a Streamlit app because he codes in Python, right? But now, he said, with all this cursor and everything, Claude Code, I can create like a React app and I can have that as our MVP. So it's closer in actuality to what ends up getting shipped at the end of the day.
I think there's something really interesting around what you said there, right? It's borderline impossible right now to figure out what is really the nuanced reality of how big the impact is. There's an article in the New York Times that says grads are doomed because of AI. There's an article in The Economist who says grads are doomed, but it's not because of AI. And actually, knowledge workers seem to be growing. I think the FT had an article on this again, right? Like it's really difficult to know what data to look for. And it's definitely one of those don't trust any statistics you didn't make up yourself. But
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious, do you have a metric that you look at where you would say, actually, if I see that change, then that would give me a sense of direction here?
I don't think there would be any one metric. And I also think it would be more of a, as I go out and I talk to people because literally I just am a professional talker, we could say. I talk to people all the time, all day, every day. If it really changes where I continuously am hearing, yeah, I'm not able to get a job or I lost my job because now like AI was good enough to do it for me. I just don't think that's necessarily the case of it's not that AI is going to be doing the entire job. AI is just going to augment us to
Yeah.
be able to do the job. Now, that may in turn trickle down to, okay, we don't need to grow our team as much because our team of 5 can now do the work of 8 or 6, so we don't have to bring on a sixth person. But I also think that because that's happening, you're seeing more innovation, more startups coming through. And so this is very specific to the very small world of tech and specifically like AI ML world of
Yeah.
tech, right? I will be curious to know how it shakes down in other industries. I do also feel like we've been talking about how taxi driver jobs are going to go away for ages because Uber came out and then you're going to have the autonomous vehicles. Waymo's great. I use it when I go to San Francisco, but we still have
Yeah.
quite a lot of taxi drivers and Uber drivers, you know? Now, if you're looking at a longer horizon, like 10-year horizon, maybe we can expect that a bigger percentage of the rides are going to be done by the autonomous vehicles.
What are the numbers that you feel where this will come in first, right? Like, is it top line revenue number from the Gen AI providers? Is it profitability of big tech because they're able to squeeze more out of their people and therefore they have a lower cost base? Or is it actually the employment numbers? Because you're definitely hearing anecdotal stories around grads struggling more to get internships now. But again, right, like, as you say, that might also be confirmation bias because those are the stories you will hear. You won't hear the stories about everyone who's successful because that doesn't kind of create any that doesn't create a new narrative that gets picked up by others.
What I'm curious to see is how these companies that cut jobs because of AI, like the ones that are very vocal about it, saying we no longer need to do that because AI can do it. I think there's been some like McKinsey cut a bunch of people and they said it was because AI now does it.
They had also overhired during COVID, right? So it's always very hard to know the actual
Exactly.
cause.
So you're like, "Oh, it's because AI or it's because you overhired during COVID?" And the same with Klarna was very vocal about how their customer
Yeah,
service now but then you dig a little deeper and then you're like, "Oh, wait, they're about to IPO?
yeah.
So they need a AI story to help boost that valuation for the IPO? Okay." So I am super jaded whenever I see anything come out about how AI is now doing the work of 10 people for 1 person.
Yeah.
I do think there is productivity gains that can happen, like I said, but it's more on along the lines of now my expectation that I have of you, if I'm working with you, I don't expect you to give me a Streamlit app. I expect you to give me a React app.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that I don't need you because now I'm going to code my own React app, you know?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. I haven't come across many organizations yet that have been able to pull that productivity out of their cost base. Right? So you
Yeah,
might get more productivity, but it's very difficult to actually release the value it creates because it is proportions of a person. And
yeah.
maybe a job is more than just a collection of tasks, and maybe you will hire a bit slower. But I haven't seen a lot of people saying, okay, great, now I can cut my investment into people.
It's funny that you mentioned that too, because the cost basis, I think I saw somebody tweet this or put it on LinkedIn where it's like, yeah, AI was supposed to save us money, but now I've got like 10 different subscriptions and all it's doing is costing me money.
I want to come back a bit to this regional differences, if you see any between Europe and the US, right? Europe at the moment is, to a certain extent, stuck in quite an interesting space. We don't have as much of a deep tech and foundational model industry as the US does or China does. Do you feel that changes the way that we look at this technology?
So, I think the builders are so far up the stack that they don't mind too much. I do think it's not necessarily around the us in Europe having models or foundational models that we can call our own, besides like the Mistral models, but it's more along the lines of in the US, it's so much easier to do things when it comes to raising money or closing customers all of that just moves at the speed of light compared to Europe. And that's where it's painfully obvious. Also, when it comes to hiring folks and then firing folks, that also moves at the speed of light in the US compared to Europe. Because if you have to know, and I'm not saying that that is a inherently bad or good thing. I think that there's a case to be made for the workers' rights and the protections that the workers have in Europe versus basically nothing in the US. But what I see is that if your funding round takes longer to close and it's for less money, and then the customers that you're trying to get take longer to close. And then you need to hire people, but you need to be damn sure that if you hire someone, it's the right person, because if you fire them, it is a very painful experience. And the workers or employee benefits, all of that workers' rights stuff, you have to pay the piper at the end of the day. So you're going to probably be a little bit more cautious in how you hire. It feels like like you're walking uphill in mud.
So you feel like in Europe you have to invest a lot more of your energy just to keep the flywheel running because there's more sand in it versus in the US. It's much better greased and therefore actually more of your effort can go into building the business.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly that.
Are there any specific developments that you're seeing right now in the space of AI that particularly excite you, that you can't wait for them to be kind of better known and properly implemented?
Ooh, I think that the really life-changing stuff is probably more on the biotech side. I keep feeling like, man, if I can stay healthy for 5 more years, I'm good. Like, I'm gonna be able to live forever, which is outrageous.
The DeepMind promise solve for intelligence, and then basically it solves everything else.
Yeah, we'll see if that's actually true, but I do think there's a lot of really cool things happening with respect to like large language models, but not necessarily large language models in biotech, like the alpha folds of the world.
Yeah.
Those are cool. There are folks that are trying to do large language model stuff with DNA sequences, which is also super interesting in my mind. So there's a lot of innovation in that realm that I find fascinating. And I also think that you're seeing a lot of private research happening, which it's maybe different than in the past where you had to rely on these institutions and government institutions to fund your research. But now, since there's like this promise of immortality, you do
Yeah.
get folks that are jumping into it, and not even just with immortality, but any type of interest that you have. Maybe there's somebody that got very rich and they had a skin problem like eczema. They're going to go and fund eczema research, right? And so if it so happens that there's folks that are trying to figure out how to best treat eczema with AI, then that sounds like a really cool area to fund if you have the means.
And are you saying basically now with the AI, it's become significantly easier to make progress in that space? And therefore you see that as a more exciting development coming?
I wouldn't say it's significantly easier. I would just say it's captured people's attention and it's captured their imagination. And I also think that it's a new area that we can explore. Just like we're exploring use cases within enterprises on how to use LLMs, there's these use cases of how to use LLMs within the body or the human genome.
Yeah. And is there any area that you're a bit worried about?
The one that is a little bit sketch is use of AI in warfare, especially because, like we said, these are systems that just by definition, they're not always going to be right. And
Yeah.
so if you start letting some kind of photo be what dictates if bombs are dropped, and there's predictive analysis on photos or videos, that gets a little bit weird.
You have two young daughters. Does any of this change the way that you think about education at home or how you think about what technology they should be using at what age?
I'm very technology off right now for both of my daughters. I have a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old, and we try and have them experience the world as much as possible because I can only expect that they are going to get enough technology when the rails come off type thing. I want to limit screen time as much as possible, and also I try to encourage, if we are gonna do the screen time stuff, or if we are gonna use technology, it's more for creative endeavors, like Procreate on the iPad, or I got a synthesizer at home, and both daughters love playing on that, and I would call that technology.
Yeah.
I think it is useful, or it's less about having them learn certain things and more about helping them to learn how to learn,
Yeah.
because that's the ultimate skill. The acquisition of skills is what is probably the most important. And then they can figure out how they use that skill. But that's something that I recognize for myself, I really appreciate having, is that ability to be self taught in many different things. And it's not just self taught, it's, YouTube taught, or having the drive to go out there and find people that are good at things and then learn from them. But that has changed over my lifetime and
Yeah.
what skills I'm acquiring. So recognizing how to be good at that and how to really learn in that way is what I'm most interested in my daughters knowing.
And the way that you phrase it, it sounds like you feel that's still at the moment mostly an analog experience. Is that fair?
Yeah, just because I think the screens have too much stimulus and it's too easy to get wrapped up in being passive as opposed to actively learning something. But I don't necessarily think that it's only analog, because there's great tools that you can use with the screens when you want to, like the flashcards game. What is it? Anki, I think. If you want to learn anything, there's a app. And so one thing that is vital for learning new things is that spaced repetition.
Hmm.
And a great way of learning through spaced repetition is through flashcards. But going back to the, is it analog, is it digital? Just because I'm trying to be more analog, and I hope to instill more analog in my daughters. We have kind of set strong boundaries on no screens as much as possible. Now, that's not to say we don't use screens at all,
Yeah.
because we definitely do, but we try to always like default to no screen. And then it's those moments of when you're in a bind, when you're in a pinch, then you can go to the screen. But it's also just as easy for me as a parent to give my kid the iPad or the phone,
Yeah.
and then like am relieved of my duties.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about this the other day, is how it's really a bit of short-term suffering on my side too.
Yeah.
Like, my daughters are going crazy because they don't have a screen, but also, like, now I have to be more of a parent.
Yeah. How do you kids react to the fact that they can't use much of a screen when your job is probably
All
80,
screen.
90% screen based?
Yeah, they haven't called me a hypocrite yet, but it's like the delineation we've kind of set as, "Hey, this is work. I'm doing work, and when it's time for you to work, you can look at the screen all you want."
I observe that I have certain patterns around what I expect AI to be able to do that are quite formed on the old ways of building software, right? Where basically software at the moment can do anything where there's a button for it. And in a way, that's not necessarily the paradigm that the new agentic systems might work into, where basically it only builds the button once you need it. And so I wonder sometimes whether exposing my kids to that earlier basically allows them to build their neural connections in a way that allows them to be much more native in that world. But that for me, therefore, ends up being a bit of that struggle around actually, is it good to expose them sooner because it makes them quite fluent and makes them native in that space? But I also agree with you that being bored is really important for curiosity and creativity. I feel like being able to entertain yourself is quite important. And like the digital world is quite easily instant gratification, and you don't build that kind of ability to wait a bit. So I don't
Exactly.
know, how do you balance those two?
Yeah, and I'm by no means an expert, but I do often wonder, yeah, wouldn't it be great if, like, my daughter was a coding savant at 6, she's already building the next billion-dollar startup, and then I can retire? Like, I would love that, but I also feel like her having a childhood where she's relating with other kids is
Yeah.
probably more important, and I'll skip out on the unicorn startup built by my 6-year-old this time around.
You wait for the second kid when she's 6 years old.
Yeah, and then I'll see. Was it the right move?
I think there's something interesting around in this world of AI and digital. How do you stay or become more human? And what are
Mm.
those human connections that are less easy to replicate or fake than maybe all of the digital stuff?
My 6-year-old also, she went through COVID, and so it was a lot of masks on, basically from 1.5 until 3.5 or 4, depending on how when you say COVID finished.
Yeah.
It was all masks all the time, and that's another thing that is pretty weird in, like, her upbringing, that she didn't get to see people's faces
Yeah.
for a lot of her adolescent life.
So you feel to a certain extent now the human side that you're focusing on is also to help compensate for this really bizarre part of her life that was in such an instrumental part of her.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm, like, consciously thinking that. I just realized at this moment when you were talking about it that, okay, she also had that experience, but I wouldn't say that I'm specifically harping on, "Let's do more human stuff because you had 3 years of people wearing masks around you."
I've definitely heard this from parents of older kids that their kids are now kind of not rejecting technology, but becoming more going, preferring to go shopping again in a store, upcycling, cooking from scratch because of those COVID years.
Yeah, fascinating.
Maybe to make up for something or as a bit of a counter movement to the current narrative around AI is going to be everything.
Yeah. I will that brings up a fascinating thought that I want to riff on with you, which is one thing that I also think is super important. And I feel like it took me a while to figure this out was when using technology, specifically like the phone and different social media apps, recognizing how it made me feel or how I felt when I used it. Because maybe it didn't make me feel any certain way, but how I felt when I used it, and then being able to stop using it because I didn't like the way I felt. I hope that I can instill that, or that my daughters can also understand that, so that if they are using certain apps and it makes them feel bad, or they feel bad when they're using it, that they can also see that and pull away from it and guide their lives, like be stronger than the dopamine hit that they get from using it.
I think it's interesting when those people that work in technology are those that are more in the detox direction. The people who work in social media are the ones that tell you that you should put your phone on black and white or gray
Yeah.
tones so it's less addictive. What is driving those people to build these products that they fundamentally then don't want their kids to use?
Well, it's just value for shareholders, right? So, on one hand, you're like, I want to create the most valuable company ever, and I want the company to be super valuable. How do I do that? Well, I get people to use the app more and buy more, click more ads, all of that fun stuff. Versus like, yeah, this moral obligation that you feel, or you know that you've almost like peeked behind the curtain. And so you're not going to tank the company because you know that, but you're also going to be like, I personally and my family, we're not going to participate in this.
So it's a way to disassociate your work from the rest of your life in a way.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that's, like, morally the way to go about it. I think if you had strong morals and you had a lot of integrity, you probably wouldn't be working for a company like that
Yeah.
if you felt that strongly about it. But it's also I can very much understand the other side where it's hard to walk away from a boatload of cash every year and being an employee, and maybe some of the stuff that they work on is actually quite stimulating.
Yeah. What are your hopes that about what AI will do for your daughters over the coming years? How do you see the world change by the time that they leave home in 15 to 20 years?
I do think there's speaking of, like, acquiring skills, AI is the perfect sparring partner. So just that's now. That's not even in 15 years, right? For them to learn things and understand things better, it's incredible how well AI can help you break down this. And if you ask it to, you've got that spaced repetition. You can do it with AI and be quizzed every day. Now, I'm pretty interested also. This goes back to that question of like, what's coming down the pipe that excites you? I wonder if anyone is going to get the form factor right of wearables,
Mm.
have AI in them and that are listening slash recording your day. And then you can use what you went through during the day as part of that learning. And so maybe it's that I got in a fight with my wife. How can I be more empathetic? And so then I can talk with AI about that. Or maybe it's that I have this really weird feeling with my coworker and I don't know, is it me? Or am I making a mountain out of a molehill? Or is it that they actually are kind of an asshole? Like you
Yeah.
can get this third person perspective that you wouldn't necessarily be able to get. And so that only happens if we allow as a society or we just start having it be more common that everything we say to anyone is going to be recorded.
You currently live in Germany, and obviously Germany has a massive concern around privacy for at least two good historic reasons. I'm curious around whether you think something like that would ever be acceptable there. Because Eastern Germany has a record of recording smell samples of people, right? So they could send dogs after them, and things like that.
Yeah, and this goes in line with the podcast that Sam Altman was on. And he was talking about how if the government wanted to, it could subpoena your ChatGPT conversations.
Yeah, and they won't delete anything.
Yeah, and they don't delete it. And so it is very weird in that regard. And hopefully, what becomes more common or what becomes easy to do, because right now you can do it, it's just not easy, is that all of your recordings are yours. It doesn't go anywhere. And so it's like local on device models that are doing that type of stuff. The models, I think, have to get a little bit better for that to happen. And I also think that there's still a few question marks there. Like these smaller models, a 7B model isn't going to give you the performance that you're going to get from a GPT-4 or Claude 4 type thing. So there's that question mark, but it would be nice if that was the design pattern was, okay, I have this wearable, but I know that this wearable is mine. It's all on my device. There's none of this that's actually going anywhere to anyone else but me.
I guess so. If I'm having a conversation with you, your device is recording my voice, and therefore
Yeah.
some of my data ends up outside of my world.
Yeah. That's the real tricky part. That's where there's like this super gray area, right? Do I have to tell you that I'm recording beforehand? Do I have to get your consent? Because it's already happening. There's already on the backside, you know how it used to be where the note taker would join the call?
Yeah.
Now the note taker doesn't even need to join the call. And you just have to assume that everything you're saying is being recorded.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that you talked about Facebook. I was similarly to you. I was at university when Facebook started, was one of the early people there. But I'm really glad that I grew up in a world where not everything I did ended up on social media. I'm somewhat worried about my kids growing up in a world where everything they do gets observed and scored or, commented on by an AI assistant that has been built by some organization somewhere that God knows what values are embedded in that system. Like, do you feel that's a nice thing for your daughters to live in that world?
No, that is a great point, is that you can get into some edge cases where you're like, wait, what did the AI just tell you to do? Who say what? That can get weird real fast. That's very true. I look at it as I was thinking about it more as like, yeah, in times that I've asked it for advice to be, how can I, here's the situation, how can I do better on it? That being said, like, yeah, maybe, not maybe, there's definitely a spin that the AI will give me. And so potentially it's that you need to have a better understanding of how to prompt it. Say, here's my values, here's what I think is the most important in life. Boom. Now tell me how I could do better in that regard. But even with that, I don't know if you're going to fully solve that problem that you're talking about.
Yeah, it's an interesting one around also kind of does it change what it means to be human? And this whole concern around becoming lazy because you rely on AI. Coaches and an incredibly valuable aspect of lots of stuff, right? Be that sports training or be that professional life. And so actually that ability of everyone having a coach constantly listening, supporting sounds super powerful. But does it disempower you as a human to be responsible for your decisions in the same way as you were mentioning earlier around your agent suddenly buying on your behalf? I can see the world of my kids being fundamentally different and very utopian and very dystopian ways at the same time. probably in ways that I would have never imagined beforehand.
Yeah, do you think that the older generation is looking at us, like, glued to our phones and thinking, "Wow, this is so dystopian"?
So I had the conversation with my parents, like actually not too long ago, around whether when the internet came about, whether they were wondering what impact that would have on my job and my personality and all of that stuff. But I think this is just the 90s was a much more optimistic time.
Yeah.
And I wonder to a certain extent now, AI is not just one thing, right? AI happens at the same time, as you mentioned, not too long after COVID. Politically, we're becoming more polarized,
Mhm.
and whether therefore it's much easier to go, quite an extreme way. And probably the reality is generally stuff ends up being somewhere in between. We're going to get some of the good stuff and some of the bad stuff, but it's not going to be quite utopia or dystopia.
The little sidebar, I realized that a lot of times the ones who are the most glued to their phones are the older generations, like older than us,
Yeah.
boomers and Gen X's. And I wonder why that is sometimes, but I saw some meme where it was talking about how back in the day, the parents used to be really stringent about no phones at the table when you were like a teenager. And now it's them who are the ones you have to tell, like, "Hey, mom, no phones at the table. Come on."
Yeah. Yeah, we have a rule at home, no phones at the table. And Jenny, it's our parents. We have to
You have to be strict with them.
remind them the most often.
But yeah, that's a fascinating one to think about because we're sitting here and we're thinking, wow, how can we make sure that our children have this life that is the best? Maybe they get to our point and they're looking at us like, dude, you guys missed out. What are
Yeah.
you doing right now? This new technology has affected you more than it's affected us.
And it's quite possible, right? I think to a certain extent, we're quite lucky. Our kids are probably going to come into the workforce by the time when this is hopefully somewhat figured out. I think it's the current generation that's now going into the workforce that has the most challenging space because we don't really know how quickly this is going to go. And either we'll make significant progress in the next 5 years or we won't. And then we probably won't make significant progress for another 10, 20, right?
Yeah. Do you have an opinion on this one where if I send you something that when you look at it, it's obviously ChatGPT written? If I work with you, right, and I send you a ChatGPT written document, do you have a certain feeling about me or that document that I've sent you?
I mean, like, are you talking about like the ChatGPT dash, for example? As soon as you see that, then you no longer trust it.
I'm thinking like imagine I have to send you some kind of a document so we can all align on the next steps of a project. We're working together on a project. And I send you this document and it's clearly just ChatGPT. Do you have a bias for me or that document or anything? Or would you consider it basically the same as if I sent you something that clearly wasn't ChatGPT and it looked like I wrote the whole thing from scratch?
I think it probably depends of whether there's something in the document that clearly makes it feel like you have put thought and effort into it and you just didn't do the polishing of it. That being said, I'm very aware of when I write documents and I get ChatGPT to look through them and make them more concise, that I will try and change them in such a way that they don't come across as ChatGPT because I feel people will judge me differently for it, despite the fact that I don't think I do judge other people differently because of the ChatGPT dash. Is that what you're referring to?
So, exactly that, where people almost have this prejudice
Yeah.
against something that is sent to them that is like blatantly ChatGPT, right? But then juxtapose that with the narrative of how AI is helping us and
Yeah.
we're so much more productive because we can just put a prompt in and we get out this whole document.
Yeah.
So juxtapose those two things. Like everybody from the top is saying AI is changing the way we work. But then if I send you a ChatGPT document, you're like, why did you waste my time with this document? Why are you giving me this? You're just phoning it in. Like you don't like working, I guess. And
Yeah.
so there's almost like this stigma around when we do things with AI that others in the company look at us and they think, man, this dude's just lazy. He's just doing everything with AI. But then you have this other side that's saying, like, yeah, we're going to, we don't need to hire people because we have our employees doing everything with AI. And I find that fascinating. Like that dichotomy of we want you as an employee to do as much as possible with AI versus when I do as much as possible with AI, I feel a little bit guilty or embarrassed. And then everyone else that sees this AI output is like, dude, this isn't that good.
Yeah.
right?
It's an interesting one coming back to this question around, is it just that we are in this weird transition period and then for our kids it will be more normal in
Which
the
is
same way as
why, yeah,
texting has changed?
that's exactly why I brought it up, was
Yeah.
because, okay, I think in 20 years from now, it's gonna be much more clear, just like I was saying, we're gonna get acclimated to so many new things, whether that's wearables that are constantly recording us or whether that is us using AI to write every single document ever.
And what skills do you want your daughters therefore to have to be happy and successful in that world?
I mean, in that world, it's hard to say. In general, the skills that I would really appreciate and that I'm trying to instill into my daughters is like a big one for me is empathy, also confidence. I've got two girls, so I want to make sure that they're confident in who they are and just in this world. And yeah, I tried to lead by example with peace of mind. That for me is important. And so I hopefully am instilling that without doing or saying anything specific to them. And lastly, like communication. Being able to communicate is like the foundation. If you can't articulate and communicate, I think it's really hard to foster like strong relationships with people.
So very much the soft skills, very much the human stuff that's actually quite hard to AIify.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess the communication, you might be able to AIify that with some voice agents, but for sure, like confidence and peace of mind, how that's very hard to AIify because that's subjectiveness.
Yeah, and I think even communication, right? A lot of it is actually the listening
Yeah.
and adapting to the other person.
Yeah.
And curiosity probably as well. I think kind of people who are really good communicators tend to be very curious, very observant.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so true.
This was an absolutely fascinating conversation. I just have one last one for you before you go. If you get to spend more time with your kids in 10 years' time because of AI, what has AI done to enable this?
I don't think that AI would have anything to do with that. It would have to be directly from me.
Hmm.
You know, like there's nothing that AI is going to enable so that now I have more time with my daughters. It needs to be that I choose to make my daughters the number one priority in my life. And so I spend as much time as possible with them.
Thank you so much.